Right, welcome everyone to the latest edition of the podcast, A Trip Down Goddington Lane, which is our P Department podcast where we get to meet an Oda Lavian and talk to them about their sporting experiences at school and beyond, and see how it's helped shape their journey and their lives and their careers and so on. So I'll be your host, Andy Kenward, and with me is Mike Perks. Behind the scenes, doing all the IT work, is James Double, but the star of today's show is Ben Falat. Ben, very welcome to the show. Thank you for giving up your time to be here with us. As always, I'm just going to give a short resume of Ben, so you can have some context of what we're going to talk about. And as you'll appreciate from that, there's plenty to sort of delve into today. So Ben left St. Olave's in 1971. And those of you who know any of your history about the school, and hopefully lots of you listening will do, will know therefore that actually he was at both Tooley Street and Goddington Lane. And I'm sure that's something we'll explore in due course. Whilst at school, Ben was involved in various sports, swimming, he captained the rugby team, he also heavily involved in athletics. He also took part in something called Boys Club. And again, perhaps we'll ask you about that in a moment, Ben, which involved various sports as well as cycling. At university, he did a degree in civil engineering at Cambridge, met his wife-to-be, who shared his passion for water sports and racing in particular, and together they took on board lots of sailboat racing. Went from single racer, but then went into a double-handed racer, and I know there's a story behind how you bought your double-handed racer, Ben, that again we'll touch on shortly. You've raced alone and also obviously with your wife all around the world. You're a captain of the Royal Navy and Combined Services team, won the Open National Championships in Ireland, France, Austria and the UK, and have coached several Olympic and world champion hopefuls at various times in their sporting careers. For your own career, you went into teaching, a wise choice, as a maths teacher, and then perhaps unsurprisingly, a career in the Royal Navy, before returning back to teaching. So that's a very short précis, and I know that there's an awful lot behind all of that, Ben, but lots for us to really dig into with you today. So I'd like us to go right back to the beginning if we can then, because every other podcast that we've had and we've spoken to has been students who have only ever known Goddington Lane, whereas obviously you come from a different era from them, and having been to Tooley Street, it'd be fascinating to hear what life was like at Tooley Street, both in general and from a sporting perspective. Could you maybe sort of tell us a bit about
that? Yeah. Hello. Good day to you all. Okay. Tooley Street. Where do I start? The walk along Tooley Street was always interesting because you walk along the foot of the arches to London Bridge Station, and the smell of alcohol-laden air was a great fillip for every morning as this warm waft came through one arch after another. We always walked on towards school on the right-hand side because the scary man, the headmaster, he always took the left-hand side, and you didn't want to meet him. You didn't want to walk in front of him because you'd be caught for a thwacking later in the day for something that you quite innocently didn't realise you were doing, or no, I was never caught, but or behind you kind of had to dawdle back. As far as I was concerned, between the head and I, we crossed lines several times on the way to school, in as much as he was on the same railway journey. He came up from Crystal Palace. I came up from Forest Hill on the train to London Bridge, and I would spot him in the train somewhere in the front-ish of the train, which was useful because we all sat at the back of the train somewhere. Make sure we didn't. He was a scary character, but hey, yeah, in his way he was all right. He actually, when I joined the school, the interview was not really the boy and the head teacher, it was the parents. I sat outside and my parents were in there for interview. And then for the last couple of minutes, I was called in, and it was all an amazing experience. Yeah, the old school, I actually, yeah, I think back very fondly. Crammed in between Tower Bridge, you could, from the art room on top of an annex building, you looked out across towards the Tower of London. You could see Tower Bridge across the Tower of London. The rest of the school, things were hidden rather behind stark walls, the backs of wharf type buildings and things.
Plus, plenty of people listening would have been on a trip there. I know we used to, excuse me, on Commemoration Day, we would troop all of the Year 7s up there to have a look around and get a sense and sit in the classroom where you had that view across the river. Who knows, Ben, maybe that view across the river inspired part of your love of water sports. But I remember going there and having a look across the river as well. It is a lovely view and a really interesting building. What was there school sport that happened in those days at Tooley Street?
Sorry, the sport. Well, there was local PE in the playground. There was 5 courts, but to do sport, where's the playing field? That was down at Dulwich. So we'd have to, on our sport afternoon, we'd have to get ourselves back up to London Bridge Station, get on the appropriate train down to East Dulwich, walk back to, oh God, what's the place called? I can't remember. But walk back to the playing fields, and God help us if we were late. The score was that that was part of school. You used to have to pay your own fare, and in as much as trying to pay your own fare, saving pennies here and there, because I had a rail pass going to Forest Hill, I'd sometimes try to get a train back to Forest Hill, jump on the bus, which was a lot cheaper, from there to complete the triangle sort of thing, and approach the playing fields from the other direction. I was lucky if a bus turned up. As you know, London buses, either they're not there or they turn up in 3s or 4s. Excuse me. But yeah, that's where the sports fields were. So that was an interesting experience. And if you can imagine a whole year group travelling on one train, we'd fairly take over the train. And sometimes the shenanigans going on was interesting. I remember a door flying open at one stage and kind of reversing itself against the side of the carriage, and we're all peering out the windows, seeing what was going on up the train. But of course, against the wind, the train travelling along against the wind, they couldn't possibly close the door again until they're in the next station, and all hell breaks loose. Of course, the next day, back at school. Yeah. That's the way the sport was. Yeah, it was split side sport. There you go.
Yeah. And which sports would you have been doing at that point?
For me, I mean, I kind of started off just sort of anything that was general sort of stuff. I did enjoy rugby, but never got in. What do I talk here? Do I talk year 1 or year 7?
Year 7 would make more sense.
So, right, year 7 most people listening these days. Yeah, because in the first form, that is year 7. I never made it into a rugby team, but there's all sorts of other things going on, clubs and societies, a bit of chess playing and things. But it would be a walk down to the local swimming pool. Again, we'd do the crocodile sort of walk, a class at a time to go down to the swimming pool, and that would happen, memory, once a fortnight perhaps. For a PE lesson, then the walk back to school, and that would be quite disruptive. The kind of setup time of going from one place to another and getting back for appropriate next lesson, quite difficult. 4 or 5 courts, 2 covered courts and 2 open courts. And then it'd be kind of football with the tennis ball in the playground. A couple of jackets laid down as goal, and that's what you do, isn't it? Or that's what you did.
Yeah. And so then you were part of that transition then, obviously, from Tooley Street to Goddington Lane, which presumably you did, trying to get my maths right here, in year 11, so 5th form. Is that right?
Actually, it would be 4th form, year 10.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, although we had, at that stage of schooling, there was this thing called a remove class. So I don't know whether that still runs. That A class, you came in at year 7. So excuse me if I talk year 1, year 2, first form, second form. I'll call it like that. You did first form, then you were at the end of first form selected, and second form you go to 2 remove, and then 4 remove, 5 remove, did O levels a year early, which meant you went in 6th form and did A levels a year early. Gave you the opportunity of broadening your A levels if you wanted to, sort of thing, or year early. There's only of my cohort, there's only one person who actually went to university a whole year early, and we all thought that was very brave of him. We were all very naive, and that was very scary. But so sorry to get onto that. But so it's the 4th form, 1967 December into 1968 January, when we joined Goddington Lane.
And what was that exciting for you as students to make that move? Were you is this something you were looking forward to?
It was a huge population in the school were already there in anticipation of the move, and so people living in Orpington or around were already populating the school, and I think there was some disappointment that the school didn't the move didn't happen earlier. And I think there's some people who were Orpington based who never actually got to see the school at Orpington, experience the school at Orpington, because they sort of joined too early. I think there was a sort of 2 or 3 year delay in the move. But yeah, it was an exciting time. And for me, particularly exciting was the trip down on that first day in January, first day of term. A huge snowstorm, and I mean the roads were covered to about. I mean it was trudging time. It was must have been over a foot deep, and I had to change trains at Bromley or somewhere along those 3 stations, and got on my connection for Orpington, and the train went out from Bickley, slightly uphill, stopped there for half an hour, watching the paint dry, the snow come down, the grass grow, whatever the expression is, boring stuff, but there was absolutely nothing happening. We sat there, and then eventually the train rolled back downhill. Engine not working, the power pickup was not working. It rolled back downhill, half into Bickley station, and we had to get off. And some people jumped down onto a line and walked back, and then catch another train which was on a running line back into onto the Orpington line. And I think I arrived at school some 4 or maybe 4.5 hours late. One colleague from the Tooley Street side, he never made it to school, and his mother decided that it was all too much of a risk, and pulled him from school on that day, and we never saw him again. I do see him on Facebook these days, but he went to a different school in Streatham, which was a bit of a surprise. We all kind of looked at each other with big eyes. You know, what's going on there? This is actually very exciting. Why not just get on and do it? Yeah. So where's that sense of adventure?
It's very much the case with the morning, Ben. It's great to have you on board. So thank you very much for your memory so far. That commute, and we have pupils, I'm sure, who will listen to this now, who commute from all across London. So the commute's definitely very much still part of the life at St Olave's. And I can imagine that, like a lot of your fond memories or memories more generally, come from those commutes. And I can imagine there's a few stories which we'll wait for another time to reminisce about, which might be a little bit less appropriate. But just whilst we're now at Goddington Lane, what were your first sporting memories of Goddington Lane? Obviously, the access to the top and bottom field. What can you remember of that experience?
I mean, huge, marvellous that you had the playing fields right on site. I mean, that was a step change to be able to, not have to do that train journey to get at a piece of grass, and to be surrounded by it. Absolutely marvellous. And the huge thing was the swimming pool, which I think sadly is no more.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, it's now a very well used sports hall.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I would gladly come along and shoot somebody that got rid of that swimming pool, because what a facility that was. A full-size swimming pool as part of a school. And to think of it today, that to have that as a heat sink for feed in electricity from the panels on the roof, to be heated like that, have that as a heat sink that you could actually then draw heat out of during the day. The technology today to have the pool potentially would be a huge asset. Somewhere along the line between my leaving school and us talking now, someone decided to turn it into a sports hall. For goodness sake, it's an indoor place. There's so much outdoor excitement at Goddington Lane. That was a sad loss.
And what were your memories of using the swimming pool in lessons? It was before my time. I know Andy, was that Mr.
Yeah, I taught swimming when I first joined the school. I remember with Mr. Holland, there was one particular year for some reason the timetable had us teaching 4 swimming lessons in a row, and literally by the time you came out, your eyes were streaming because of the amount of chlorine that was in it. You couldn't really teach in the afternoon because you couldn't see anything. I got there after. There used to be a diving board in there, didn't there, Ben? You might remember a diving board, but I don't.
2 boards, one springboard and one diving board. Yes. And deep end, shallow end, but the shallow end was not that shallow. It was swimmable. And as I say, a full-size pool. I wrote off to the British Sub-Aqua Club to try and generate a link. This was when I was in the 6th form, to try and generate a link for Sub-Aqua as a separate new thing to do. The PE staff at the time were not particularly supportive, and it all kind of fell through, I think. But I was keen to do that. There's 2 of us who gained through the British Life Saving Society, that's what it's called. The 2 of us got a distinction award for life-saving skills. We went through a program there. There was a kind of programs you could do, bronze medallion and something else, and distinction award was at top level. So those of us who were keen on swimming, those few of us who were really keen on swimming, did that. And we'd be part of the school swimming team, go off and swim at Greenwich, swim at Downley, can't remember the name of the place. There's another sort of county pool there, and there'd be kind of inter-school swing events go on. So we'd go off and do that kind of thing. Yeah. So swimming was a big deal for me. And
but it seems to me that you threw yourself into lots of sports, Ben. Is that fair? You threw yourself into all sorts of different activities and sports.
Yeah, I did. One Christmas present was a Gray's squash racket because I was mad keen on squash. But availability onto the squash court when there's only 4 squash courts and lots of people wanting to do it, that's an issue. Availability. Thinking about it, I suppose a lot of those kind of things. I mean, the swimming that I did was individual swimming. The squash was individual play. I was a team player in terms of rugby and things, but I just enjoyed being outside, doing outside things. Really, there you go.
That was going to be one of my questions to you, Ben. Do you prefer, or it may be not as simple as this, but do you prefer the more individual sports or prefer the team sports, or, as I say, is it more complicated than that?
I think it's probably more complicated. What I would say is that as a philosophy, I don't need to play to the crowd, play to myself. So the notion of I don't enjoy playing to the crowd. So I find it slightly embarrassing to be in front of a crowd and potential expectations there might be of an audience. So on the rugby field, I could throw myself into a game, but there's this kind of feeling at the back of your neck that there's people on the touchline watching, and they have an expectation of what you should be doing. Maybe they can read the tactics slightly different to the way you're reading it, and the criticism coming through later and things. Hey, throw that in the bin and try just do my own thing. Yeah.
It sounds, Ben, from you, that you're massively proactive and wanting to get yourself in kind of every camp, try different sports, as we've just mentioned. How does that affect your kind of the academic pressures at the time? Were you able to find a nice balance between the two? Something which we speak about a lot on this podcast and as a PE department is the term balance, and making sure that we're not just producing pupils who are wonderful academically, but actually it is about the bigger picture and about the journey. What was your memories of school and balancing the academic pressures and obviously throwing yourselves into a number of different sports?
Hey, look, I think at school I was probably quite naive in those terms, that I didn't really think about it. It was just a matter of throwing myself into whatever was available. And that meant the academic side on the one side, that was the necessary. The enjoyable on the other side was the sport, whatever it was. And just throw yourself into it. Weekends, I'd be with pals down in Orpington, very few pals back at home, some pals up in London. I'd be on a bicycle. My parents didn't have a car. I'd be on the bicycle getting around to meet people. Then that led into at Orpington the school cycling club sort of thing. But rugby, I'd find myself during the winter playing Saturday inter-school match and aching like hell on a Sunday, getting on the bike and doing a coast trip down to Brighton and back, or on the other side of the river, Southend and back, or something, just to do it. Weekdays, I'd find myself very, very tired. But and I had every excuse under the sun for not doing my homework. Hey, am I allowed to give the story of the top capping excuse for not doing your homework?
Oh, we've heard a few in our time.
Okay, try this one. I get off the train at London Bridge. I got a few books out of my bag. I waited for the next train to come through, threw them down onto the track. Train duly rode over the book. I let the train go out the station, hopped down onto the track, picked the book up, brought it to school in total shreds. Look, sir, you can't possibly read this. I've lost pages on the way. There you go. Try that one.
It sounds excellent. We have heard a few in our time, and I can imagine that's right up there. We should. Oh yeah, pupils, if you're listening, no, don't take Ben's advice there, please.
No, you've heard it. So it's got to be something different.
It's got to be something original. Please be original.
Yeah, the thought involved, the thought processes involved. Going back to your original question, the balance between sport and academics. I mean, look at the number of sports people who are actually highly intelligent academics in their own right, who the tactics of whatever sport, the thought process that goes with it, the focus is all, if you like, what we'd now call transferable skills. And these transferable skills are hugely evident when you look at high-level sport, that the people just can focus on the right things. And I think that's something that sport brings out, is that for a short, sharp time, you can focus on the right thing, the important thing, the tactic in the game, if you like. And it's that same thought process, that same focus that goes into the academic side to return the right kind of result. What's the important thing for this evening in terms of the essay title, the way that you lay it out, or the maths problem? What's the important thing that I've got to get out of it? And those are totally transferable skills. And sometimes at school I was quite unaware of it, but as a grey-haired old git now that I am, look, I am aware of it now after a lifetime, how closely transferable that whole gamut is. There you go. Does that answer your question?
No, yeah, absolutely. It's something which we talk about a lot at school, and I think it's something that definitely comes with time, life experience. But the message from us is always, as a department, is that balance. Play your sport, work hard, enjoy life, play hard as well. But especially when times where there is so much pressure on exams, that it's even then more important than ever that you get that balance. Yes,
you talk about exams and things. That the focus into exams is like being on the sports field, on the rugby field. You're under examination because you have got to produce the result on the field. That's what you've got to do. And so you read the game. You identify the player that needs hitting hardest and earliest. You identify the slightly weaker players. At top level rugby, the players quite evidently in a non-penalty situation will test the referee and try something just to see what the referee's interpretation is. So both teams one team having tried it, then both teams can go forward and play to the referee's interpretation. You're constantly under exam conditions to push the boundaries, identify what the important things are, and take it forward from there.
So if I was to ask you a more broad question, how would you say that, and we've touched on a few of these points, but how would you say that sport has actually shaped your life? So even to date and through university, in the wonderful careers and experiences that you've had, how would you say, and what role has sport played in shaping you as an individual and as a man?
I am a hugely competitive person. I don't know that I was aware of that early on at school. And to me, I have this thought going through my mind where I turn something around and I say, it's not the taking part, it's the winning. And therein, I mean, as far as sport is concerned, I can enjoy sport if I'm winning. It's a big downer if I'm not winning. If I'm simply taking part, why am I doing that? So that's life as well, that if I find myself in a social environment, in work environment, I would wish to make a contribution. And that's the kind of winning aspect, is constantly making a positive contribution. So right now, I'm a counsellor. I'm a governor at the area hospital. I am the chair of a area yachting association. I represent the region to the sports lead authority. So the taking part in sport, the winning in sport, rather than just taking part, but the leading and achieving. So let's call that winning. Let's call that achieving. So the achieving in sport translates to, in life, those roles which are, if you like, social leadership aspects. Yeah.
It's very refreshing, your honesty, and it's certainly everybody on this podcast, I'm sure Mr. Kenward can relate, loves winning and the euphoria that you get with winning. And we're all competitive. I think there's an element of each individual that is competitive. It might not be on the sports field, but in life, and they can definitely relate to that. I suppose if I was going to explore that a little bit further, when would you say, is there a sporting moment, or when have you had your greatest learning? Has that been through winning, or has that been through a failure? Something which we, again, sorry to reminisce, but it's important that we bring it and make it relatable to our pupils, is that we often talk about the concept of, and it comes from a podcast, I'm not sure whether you've listened to it, but it's the High Performance Podcast. It's a wonderful podcast if you ever get any time. And they talk a lot about fail and failure, and fail early and fail often, because that's often when your best learning happens as a consequence. I'm curious to know, Ben, that you obviously talk about winning a lot, but it is a journey, and you don't just win all the time. And to get where you've achieved, there has to be some failure as well. I just wanted to know kind of what your relationship would be like with failure.
Yeah, as soon as you started talking about that, for some reason I pinged straight back to a failure situation before you'd even mentioned the word failure. And my sport now, my lifetime sport, has been sailboat racing, dinghy racing. I hadn't even touched on that when I was at school. Totally alien to me, but I was into water sports in some manner. That attracted me. I went to university, and at university, I found myself into dinghy sailing. It was going to be dinghy racing, but it started as dinghy sailing. That's where I learned to sail. And the failure aspect that I immediately pinged with as soon as you started talking there, Mike, was that learning to sail in a slow old little thing on the Hamble River, part of Southampton Water, not being able to make headway, even now, even today, one of my lasting memories is the smell of rotting seaweed attached to a centre channel buoy as I hung on to it because I couldn't make headway against the raging current, waiting for the stars of sailboat racing, who were out team racing representing the university, to come back with the rescue boat from wherever they were around the corner of the river to give me a tow back home. Now that was the failure of, could I live with that? Could I take that forward? That I simply couldn't get home. I couldn't do it well enough. And that was a real driver to get better quickly.
Mm.
Yeah.
So
immediately, automatically, as soon as you started talking, I went to a failure situation and what effect that had on my development in that sport. Yeah, there you go.
It's wonderful to hear you say your reflections, and I suppose the reason why I say that is because at St. Olave's, as you know, there's still this massive emphasis on achieving greatness in terms of whether that's on the academic side of things, and it's highly pressurized. But actually, as we all know, as we've got life experience, sometimes it is about putting yourself in that almost stretch zone where you are feeling uncomfortable, and failure very much is a possibility, possibly a probability. And what do you do in that scenario? Do you put yourself in that zone and to potentially fail? Or do you just take yourself out and continue doing what you're doing in your comfort zone? So, and I can imagine that relates a lot to sailing, where you are in that uncomfortable stretch zone.
Whatever you're doing, you need to enjoy it at the end of the day. You need to get some enjoyment out of it. And yes, there are these stress situations where you find yourself failing, and what you build out of that is an ability to manage the stress. Is that you can, if you can recognize it and build up a resistance to the stress, so that you recognize it, you manage it, you take it forward, and mitigate the amount of stress that you're going to find yourself under if you just keep trolling along. You then you look for strategies to go the next step.
And it's that resilience, the ability to, when your back's against the wall, to think creatively, how am I going to get myself out of this experience? And you often learn, well, you're definitely not going to make that mistake again. I've made that mistake. So the next time I'm presented with a similar challenge, task, which life throws your way, you can learn, and you've got that almost experience, knowledge in the bank. What
sadness if you made the same mistake again. Because if you made the same mistake again, you haven't learned. So it is a matter of taking each situation and building on it. And kind of something that you said there a moment ago, when I was in the Navy, on at least 3 occasions, I turned down the opportunity of racing around the world. Around the world race but we could get onto that later or not. But the kind of person who is good at racing around the world by themselves, at the end of the day, for example, the opportunities that I turned down was part of a team on a boat. But if you were working by yourself, or even I suppose within the team, the kind of people that do well are the versatile people, the people who can jump into different situations and make the best of it. And therein is a lot of reflection of previous experiences at doing a variety of things and learning from each experience and getting building up that armory of being able to respond in different ways, but efficient ways, to overcome the latest problem, whatever that might be. So you're throwing yourself into new situations, but you're using an armory of background experience to assimilate, build on, to make the best of the current situation, so it doesn't become a mistake. It becomes a positive that you can take forward. Yeah, the versatile person who can think on his feet and make the best of situations.
Again, that transferability, those transferable skills, which are so key in all walks of life, as we know.
Yeah, there's so many words here, so many expressions that keep on popping up again and again, don't they? Transferable skills, versatility, making the best of. I'm kind of aware of the same sort of words and expressions coming up between us here.
And this is where it's so important, I think, that younger people, I mean, all people really, but younger people who perhaps this podcast is more directed at, do listen to this and then do think, I want to build those skills. And you only get those through experience, putting yourself out there, having a go, not having that fear of failure, and just accepting it is all part of a journey. But ultimately, that journey is going to culminate in you developing these skills. They're going to help you out in a variety of ways in your life. Some of them directly perhaps to do with the sport you're enjoying, but I'm sure in your teaching career, Ben and Mike, and for myself, we've had situations that we're able to deal with because of experiences we've had in sport. But I'm sure also for you, Ben, in your career in the Royal Navy, I'm sure that there were moments then where you handled it better because of certain skills and so on you developed, partly through sport and partly, I'm sure, through lots of other things that you've been involved in. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. It's fair to say. I mean, in the Navy, I found myself bridge watchkeeping, deck duty, bridge duties. So in the Gulf at one stage, we were training for protecting ourselves against missiles coming from shoreside, and our role was to protect the tanker, protect our lifeline, the tanker which would have our stores, our fuel, and all that, protect that. And at one stage, the captain of the ship, who was down in what I might call the war room, down in the bowels of the ship, he came up to the bridge and he said, "I just want to see this for myself. We cannot see the tanker. We are so close to the tanker. How are you able to do that? What's going through your mind?" Because I was steering the ship, I was directing the ship to be so close to the tanker, which to most of the officers would be too stressful. They'd stand off a bit. Maybe I was being naive that this multi-million-pound thing, I was playing it as a toy. But you could have thrown a potato from ourselves, the frigate, to the tanker, which was bigger than us. But we were so close that the instruments were picking the tanker up as part of ourselves. They couldn't see it individually. Now, that was a kind of just, again, building on experience of taking things to the edge, taking things to the limit as I could see it without doing damage. Court-martial if I did damage, but hey, didn't quite get that far. Oh yes, on my ship, I was the first new officer after it had hit London Bridge, but that's another story. Yeah, it was on a ship's visit to the Pool of London. They wanted to leave. They got caught by a tidal current. They hit London Bridge. Can you believe it? I was the first new officer after that. But the situation I described was taking things to the limit. I mean, it's like on a squash court that you're trying to play a winning shot, and you're playing up and down the wall, really close to the wall, the side wall, really close, really low, and you're trying to get it above the tin, but low enough so you're playing a winning shot. And it's on the squash courts. On the squash court, it's a harmless failure to miss-hit, to hit the tin, to lose the point. In real life, I've got to judge it. I've got to cope with the stress situation to not do multi-million pound damage. There you go. There's a transfer from the squash court to driving a ship.
Yeah, that lower stakes situation that prepares you for the higher stakes situation.
Yes. Yeah.
That's great. It's great to bring it to life with some examples like that, Ben. So thank you for that. Can we go back to when I want to hear this story about how you you were at university, and I think at the time, correct me if I'm wrong, that you were into sort of single racing, and then you and your wife to be decided actually you should pool money and buy a double racer. Is that right? And sort of share this passion?
Yeah, that's right. We in those days, as a student, you got a grant from the LCC, the London. Oh, what was it called? Memory, greyhead on get here. I can't remember. London County Council. That's right. You got a grant, and because I didn't smoke and I didn't drink too often. Note the pause there. I didn't drink too often. I didn't smoke. I didn't run a car. So I had money to spare out of the student grant, and out of that, I saved up, and I was able to buy my first single-hander, second-hand, of course, but bought a single-hander. She was born on a houseboat, lived all her life to do with being on the water and things. She was a total natural. And we kind of, and she had a single-hander, and we got together, and it was her decision that what we ought to do was get together and sell both single-handers and get a double-hander, and that kind of changed the direction of our sail sport, our competitive sail sport, and we went on doing that together. Kind of how did that happen? I was quite nuts. I wanted to take my single-hander, totally naive. I wanted to take my single-hander from Southampton. By the way, I think you introduced me as having gone to Cambridge University. Right early on, I went to Southampton University, but I wanted to take my single-hander from Southampton to Whitstable for a championship. Just to experience the championship, see what it's like. Never done one. I didn't have a car. How was I going to do that? I went to geography department. I got the maps out. I got the charts out. I plotted my journey, coast hopping and camping along the south coast, past Dover, round the corner, and to attend the championships. And surely someone there would help me out to lend me a trolley to get the boat up onto the beach. When I got there, I'd meet that hurdle when I get there. That was the idea. Veronica looked at this and thought I was totally nuts. And that was the kind of catalyst for her to say, Ben, stop it. Just let's pool resources and go in a different direction. There you go. That's what we did. We went in that different direction, and haven't looked back. We've almost always sailed together from then on.
And am I right in saying that you bought this double-hander from an old Alavian? By chance, right. Is that right?
Yeah, almost. Yeah, we bought this double-hander. We sailed it for a while. It was an old second-hand boat. It didn't quite go fast enough. We then, after the next winter of sailing, we decided on the spur of the moment it wasn't going fast enough, so we best get a better one. So we sold it, and oh no, that weekend, what were we going to have to sail? We didn't have a boat. We'd best go buy one. In the same magazine that we'd advertised our boat, we found another boat which fitted the bill as being newer, potentially faster, but the other end of the country. So we travelled from East Coast down to West Country, and we found this boat, thought it was great straight away, but the guy selling it, it was an agent, a boat yard that was selling it, and who was the seller? It was at the end of the sales process, that we discovered the seller was actually a guy who had been my woodwork teacher. I couldn't believe it. I mean, when the name came out, Justin Eddy, who was he? He lived in the Scilly Isles. Yes, I remember him at school having a strange accent. I had to ask, could it possibly be the same guy? Was he a woodwork teacher? Yes, he was a woodwork teacher. And yeah, there you go. So it wasn't an older Lavian directly, it was an old teacher. Yeah. We have corresponded, but he's off on some little island called the Scillies. So we haven't actually met, but that kind of was springboard for some higher level sailing as far as we were concerned, I was concerned. I had no idea that he was into this kind of sailboat racing while I was at school. He did that totally privately. I had no idea. It's just that chance connect with St Olave's after school. There you go. Yeah.
And Ben, I know that you've obviously experienced competing yourself, but you've also coached, am I right in saying, a whole variety of high performing, I can imagine from grassroots amateurs to almost, as Mr. Kenward and mentioned earlier, to a very high performing athletes with a lot of ability. One, how does your coaching change between the two? And almost my second question is, well, what is it like coaching at the very top of sport? What advice and wisdom can you pass on?
Right. I do not like teaching sailing. I find it an embarrassment because I look at myself and I think, God, what was I like when I joined university? I couldn't do it, and someone had to pass over the basics of those skills to me somehow or other. Actually, I didn't do any kind of course. It was all self-taught, or self-learning process of some sort. And I do not enjoy teaching sailing at all. I don't do it. And to me, coaching is a mind game. It's a mind game of taking someone who can do it and not pretending that I'm any better than them, because they are the expert. And what I've got to do is somehow play a mind game of drawing out, analysing to achieve the best possible future performance. So that, to an extent, if you like, is the teacher bit in me, playing different students to their abilities, treating different students not as a amorphous block, but treating individuals as individuals and drawing out of them what they really enjoy doing, what their really good skills are, who can best respond in class, if you like. So it's very much a similar sort of process. Who am I going to select to answer a question, not to put them totally on the spot, but to make it a learning situation for the whole class by picking the most appropriate person at the time. So if I want thinking time, I'll have to pick someone who is not necessarily going to be able to pinpoint the right answer at the right time. That gives thinking time for the whole class. If I want to move on, or if I want to develop something, I need to take a absolutely top level student that I know in my back of my mind is most likely to have the answer already. What I mustn't do is pick on someone who is going to struggle with an answer, and when too many other people are going to have that answer already. Now, in terms of coaching, it's the kind of, I go back to saying, if I'm coaching someone who is good, I mustn't pretend to be any better than they are. But what I've got to be able to do is be their eyes and ears outside of their own persona. I've got to try to analyze, try to take their skills and be able to take those out and draw them aside from where they are, actually in the boat, talk about it afterwards. One of the sad things about sailing is there's a lot of background noise, a lot of displacement when I would be perhaps in a motorboat chasing a sailor who's quietly sailing. And one of the sad things is that there's a natural tendency to shout, because and shouting can be can reflect anger. It's not anger; it's just trying to be heard. And so, like that, I mean, you see it on football pitch. You see the team manager on the side shouting instructions to his team. And sometimes when the camera falls on the team manager, they look an angry person. I wouldn't say they're necessarily angry. They're just trying to transmit that analysis that they can see from the side. So the coaching, yeah, I enjoy high-level coaching, thought about coaching, taking people who are good and making them see themselves and become even better.
There's a couple of wonderful things which you mentioned. So one being almost that role of facilitator as opposed to dictator.
Yeah, absolutely.
In that coaching and almost sounds like you're teaching as well. So facilitating opportunities rather than dictating this is the way which you need to do it. And the second theme which I pick up on, which has been consistent with other members that we've had on the podcast as well, is almost this humility and how important humility is. And you made reference to the fact that actually I'm no better than the person who I'm working with or I'm coaching. It's a together process of making sure that you can achieve your potential. And a lot of coaches, across various sports, might not necessarily reference that humility straight away, and they might view that as a potential threat, weakness, in that process. But what is really refreshing to hear is that actually your acknowledgement that learning is a very fluid process, and that it can happen both ways. And actually, to get to where you need to be, I might need you teaching me, but then I'm going to be able to offer you my experience and my input. And that was just so refreshing to hear. So thank you, Ben.
Hey, look, I just, while you were speaking there, I had to write down in front of me 3 words: facilitator, dictator, and humility. Yeah, 100%. I like that. I like what you say there, Mike. And those taken together are part of the coaching scene. How sad to have someone who puts themselves on a pedestal and becomes a dictator and tries to make the potential excellent sportsman in front of them a reflection of themselves. That's not the way. The way is with humility. I hadn't thought of that before, but is with humility and being that enabler, being that facilitator. Yeah, I during my naval experience, I was at one stage for 2.5 years. I was the head of a leadership management school in Portsmouth. So I ran the personal development, personal leadership, personal management aspects. We used to take people off to the Welsh mountains and things to put them on create a stress situation, and then add more stress with tasks and things to do. But that was practical side, but there's the background thinking side, and I like your 3 words there. Yes.
No, I mean, I that was just what jumped out the page to me from what you were saying. So,
no. Look, what are we doing here? This is a blank interview. Yeah. I don't know what questions you're going to throw at me. I've given you a brief of my background, but I still don't know what questions you're going to throw at me, and you don't know exactly the response. You don't know me well enough. You don't know exactly the response that I'm going to throw at you. So we are now in a quasi-coaching situation, and we are trying to draw the best out of each other, aren't we?
Exactly right. Yeah.
You're taking the role of coach here, and you're trying to draw out of me good responses for the program, and I'm one of the. I'm a different kettle of fish to your younger sports representatives who've been on already. As I say, grey-haired old git. I keep coming back to that, but I've been there, done a lot of it, and I'm slightly different. But what I perceive here is we're kind of in this mutual player and coach situation between us on the screen. Oh,
yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's amazing because we talk a lot in school as well, and Mr. Kenward will vouch for me here about a growth mindset, which is something which is done bounded around quite a lot recently, but have a growth as opposed to fixed mindset. And I think that's just something which I can definitely appreciate. In there's learnings wherever. You just have to go in with a mindset that there is potential to learn in every walk of life. And again, bringing it back to a sports context, actually, how many opportunities are there to learn these transferable skills? But how many opportunities are there to learn in sport? Is something which I think that is a message which I couldn't preach highly enough. And that's just evident with our conversations now and our reminiscing of times gone past now.
Yeah. Okay. This growth mindset, I've written that one down as well. That kind of ties into the dictator attitude of trying to create some person, situation which is a reflection of what has been, and it kind of builds a wall, precludes the idea of personal development, growing out and growing beyond. Yeah, that growth mindset is useful. Another key word that you're giving me. This is all useful stuff. Hey, 68-year-old here, and I'm learning so much here. I'm loving it. Thanks.
There's learnings everywhere, and I've learned a hell of a lot from yourself just in this last hour. So we really appreciate your time, and I'm sure this podcast could go on for another hour, but I'm very aware of your time, Ben.
It's an hour already. Wow.
Yeah.
Ben, I did just want to ask about sort of sailboat racing particularly, because at school we've obviously got certain sports as part of our curriculum and part of our extracurricular program that we get students to get involved in and so on, and our fixtures in the rugby and the cricket and so on. Excuse me. But we do try and push students to get involved as many different activities and sports that we can. And I think, although, yes, as Mike said, there needs to be a balance in life between academic and work and music and drama and everything else that people are into. We'd like to think that people try and have a bit of a balance in their sporting pursuits as well. Ultimately, of course, they're likely to specialise eventually. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I just wondered if you could give you a chance now to sort of plug your sport, because I'm here as Director of Sport, sort of plugging all sport, whatever they get into, as long as they leave the school wanting to stay involved in sport, some sport. I think then we've probably partly done our job, at least as a P department. So shall I give you a minute or two to sort of plug sailboat racing and see if you can sort of inspire some people? So what is the thrill of it for you? And if someone listening to this thinks, actually, you know what, that does sound like something I want to get involved in, how would they go about getting involved in it?
Okay, how do you get involved? How do you go about getting involved in it? I found myself drawn to water sports in some manner. It'd been swimming at school, but I looked at canoeing, and through a boys' club. I think it's not non-PC these days to talk about boys' clubs, but that's what existed in those days. But we went off, did some canoeing in a working dock at Teddington. It was horrible, oily, greasy, smelly. I didn't enjoy it. The next try at water sports was rowing club at Greenwich. I turned up at Greenwich on the bicycle, of course, turned up there and it was low tide, and we got this rowing skiff and we had to carry it through the Thames mud. We were sinking into the knees to start with, then it became down to the groin, then the waist. And you had to do kind of swimming movements through mud, carrying this boat above you that was trying to drive you under. And we got to the water, and then you had to swim holding onto the boat, cleaning yourself off as best you could before climbing in over one end of the boat. It was not a pleasant experience, but I tried one canoeing, I tried the other rowing. Those were my introductions. I then got into university, and it was still water sports. And I went to the bun fight, the freshers' bun fight at university, and I looked at what water sports were there. There was sub-aqua, there was scuba diving, but no competitive aspect that I could perceive. I looked at sailing, and there was potential competitive aspect. And actually, the people driving it at the time were the team racing types. So immediately I could perceive an element of competitiveness there, which I enjoyed. I brought that with me. And so it was that won out. And so I took on sailing. Orpington? How much sailing opportunity is there in or around Orpington? Not a lot. So you have to go out and find it. And I mean, there is actually a sailing club on a small reservoir at Crystal Palace, if you can believe that. There is, then you kind of look at sailing clubs on the Thames or on the Medway, or going down southwards to Weirwood, or or further on the coast. There's some reservoirs around that you might look at. But what does sailing give me? Has it given me? It's given me a lifelong sport. A lot of sports, I reckon, Andy, you're past it. I reckon you reach your peak at about 27 years of age.
Mr. Pokes has passed it as well, then, I reckon.
Hey, I've got until next Thursday.
Yeah, look. I mean, really, that's when you bring together enough of a lifetime of useful experience in terms of building up experiences in terms of tactics and how to do it, and marrying that with the physical side of being at pretty much a peak of physicalness. So that's where you kind of peak out, and then you move on to your mid-30s and things, and you find that the physical side starts to fall away a bit, and you have to work really hard at it. When you get to your 60s, like me, even a cut, a scratch, noticeably takes longer to heal. The body takes longer to heal. The recovery time is longer and things. But what does sailing give me? Sailing has given me the opportunity of playing the highest possible level sport early on that I could, but taking it through and choosing my direction later. And it's a lifetime sport. It's you might see a prejudice coming up here. It's not golf, which is taken up by many older people because they've moved on beyond the earlier physical sports and are now looking for something else. Hey, can you perceive my prejudice there? Sorry about that, but I'm trying to call a spade, and yes, the top level golfers are the guys who will take it up early, who will develop it in the same way to the time in life when they can do it the best. But there's a whole population of people who take it forward at a much later stage in life, when perhaps a different, more physical sport has had to take second run. What sailing's done is given me something that I can choose a direction, choose different lines, and actually the optimum age within sailing has kind of grown with me to an extent that whereas we used to look at 30-year-olds, 35-year-olds as being old once upon a time, having become 40, we find a lot of contemporaries at 40 still doing it at a high level. Having become 50, that same group of us are still doing it at a high level. Now in 60s, I'm at the wrong end of 60s here, the grey-haired old git. At the wrong end of 60, I find myself still able to do the sport at a reasonably high level. But what I really enjoy is playing against the youngest competitors in their 20s and seeing how much I can take off them still and surprise them. And that surprise comes with tactics. It comes with an appreciation of the game, and which compensates for my failing physical abilities. Yeah, my failing physical abilities. They've got the physical. I'm gradually losing it, but I can compensate. There you go. There's sailing, sail sport racing, and my sailing is kind of the smallest of boats, where it's akin to sitting in a small open-top Lotus sports car with your bum 6 inches off the ground, and you can feel the speed, a need for speed. You can feel it. Whereas if you're sitting 7 feet off the ground in the cab of a articulated pantechnicon, a articulated lorry, there's a huge amount of skill involved in driving an Arctic around the roads. But hey, you don't get the sense of speed there. You don't get that sense of excitement. You get that sense of control. I'm big, and others have got to get out of the way of me.
So for anyone listening who's a bit of a thrill seeker, then maybe sailboat racing is for you. Maybe you should look into that. As I say, we advocate all sports, but it's good to have something plugged that's not so mainstream, but still can derive huge benefits from it for both the sport directly and just for yourself, as you've discussed throughout the last sort of hour or so, Ben. So thank you very much for that. I'd like to finish, if I can, with some sort of fairly quick fire questions. Is that all right? Just a sort of 4 or 5 questions. They don't have to be that quick fire, Ben, if you want to give a bit longer answer. All right, let's see how we get on then. So when was the last time you cried at a sporting event?
Why would I cry at a sporting event? No. Sporting events. I'm not a good spectator, but in terms of taking part, I want to enjoy it. Sport's not for crying. Sport's for enjoying. I can cry at a soppy film, but
okay. So that's
no. Crying's not. Sport is for enjoying and getting out there and doing it, and a feeling of fulfill. And no, sorry, skip that answer. Next one, go on.
Next one. Name 3 dinner guests, sporting dinner guests that you would choose to sit around the table and have dinner with.
Can I pick anyone?
Yep.
Anyone at all? Right. Okay. Princess Anne. Princess Anne. Princess Royal. She is a fantastic individual. She has a life of giving and social support and giving of herself. She's got a huge ability to focus. She's a double Olympic sports lady. She can focus. Her focus is absolutely amazing. Her memory for names. She needs to meet you once and she will remember who you are and what your background is. I admire her giving and I admire her ability to focus. That's one. I'll go then to the other end of the scale. Someone who you probably wouldn't know at all, but he's a sailing person. Princess Anne is a sailor as well. Yeah. Rodney Patterson. Rodney Patterson is a multiple Olympic sailor. He went to the Mexico Games. He won a gold medal there, first of his several gold medals. But he is hugely self-centered, so he can sit the other end of the dinner table. Princess Anne at one end, yeah, who is very much about other people, but she can focus. This guy is totally self-centered. He would not accept a coach. He would do it himself. He'd for the national selection trials, he would launch his boat from the other bank of the Solent. He would join in, win, and then disappear off back to his base. He would not be part of the national scene, but he was so good that he was a natural selection. Now, that seesaw at opposite ends of the table might create some friction, and I just enjoy that. Yeah. But in the middle, I think I'd take someone else who would provide a lot of balance, a lot of humour, and a lot of perspective, and bring the two together. Roger Federer, to be admired. Totally excellent sportsman in himself, but a leader for his sport, a leader in terms of representation, and so forth. There's my 3. Princess Royal, Rodney Patterson, and Roger Federer.
All right, leave it with us. We'll see what we can do, Ben. Sounds like a fascinating dinner.
Yeah, the forks will be flying. And someone in the middle with a racket fielding them back again.
Other than water sports, what's your favourite sports to either play or to watch on TV or live?
Watch. I said I'm not a good spectator, but watch. I do enjoy rugby. You get a lot more out of rugby on the television than you do actually attending. My bucket list on retirement, my bucket list included going to Wimbledon, going to Twickenham, going to Lord's, doing those kind of things. Actually, at Twickenham, the stop-start of the game was a disappointment to me. So I do enjoy watching the TV rugby because the stoppages are filled in with replays and things and looking at hows and whys. So enjoy watching that. But doing it, squash was always a good one for me for a long, long time. I treat squash as a workout. And cycling I do occasionally these days, not so much at all anymore, not a serious cyclist. But watching television rugby and playing as a workout squash. There you go.
Great, thank you. And then, excuse me, last question then. If you could go back in time, what advice would you give to an 11-year-old Ben Falat in terms of sport?
Ooh, what advice? Do it again. Do it again. I've enjoyed every moment. I think what I would say is outgrow that naivety early on. Just start looking around and analysing and planning a way ahead earlier. That successful people, I think perhaps I've underlined, you can recognise a competitive nature, a want to get on. The successful people in life are people who make a plan early, who can then follow through that life plan with some direction. I went through life just picking things up as I went, bouncing around all sorts of experiences, all sorts of different experiences, but without a plan. So what I would say perhaps is, if you're interested in water sports, pick up on that a bit more, with a bit more focus. Don't drop the others, but focus on it and say, what do I actually want to get out of this, as opposed to what do I want to do now? There's the advice. What do I want to get out of it, as opposed to what do I want to simply do now?
Ben, that's great. Thank you so much for that. I've really appreciated those responses, and indeed your responses for the last hour and a bit. I think we've, like you said, hopefully you've learned a little, but certainly I'm sure Mike and I have learned a lot. Always great to reminisce with people about their time back at school. And I think particularly so in your case, it's been really interesting to hear back from the Tooley Street days, which we don't hear enough about really, through into sort of now when you've had, you can sort of reflect and look back. So there's a lot for us to sort of take away from this podcast. So really appreciate your time with that. But I normally finish by saying that your trip down Goddington Lane is coming to an end, but I guess for you it's your trip down Goddington Lane and Tooley Street is now coming to an end. But you've been very generous with your time and with sharing your stories, and I particularly liked how you were able to sort of link your sporting experiences back to sort of real life situations. That was great and very insightful for us. So thank you very much. I'm sure Mike will want to say thanks as well in a moment.
Well, thank you for your kind words. I hope I've fulfilled some sort of expectation for you, but I take one of the words that Mike raised earlier, element of humility. Thank you very much. I hope I haven't bored you, actually.
Far from it.
There you go.
It's been brilliant, Ben. Thank you very much for your time. Cheers.
Okay. Cheers.